me?
I can see you. Yeah.
That was so sad. It literally like skipped everything as soon as you started talking about Francois Gobali. So
yeah,
it's your first internship, and then you went there to like say, hey, Bar Fund is this new project I'm working on. And you said it's like you've had a very personal relationship with that gallery.
well, I wouldn't say, I said peripheral.
Oh!
Peripheral. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not a peripheral relationship with that gallery. They're an important part of my history in LA. I interned there for maybe, honestly, it might have only been like 3 months or 4 months. And then I got the job with Andrea, and I was like, okay, this is like, I'm driving out to the desert. I don't need to be like interning here. But I was there for like, I don't know, it might have been 6 months. It might have been 4 months. It was some small amount of time. But in that time, Art Basel Miami Beach was happening. So I went to the fair because I was like, I'm from Miami. I know how to get around. I like, have a place to stay. You should totally take me. And so they got me like a flight back to Miami, and I worked the fair. And, it was just like a very brief, like working situation with them that I don't know, that I still to this day like really appreciate. It was an unpaid internship, but like I was there because I wanted to be there, and I feel like it was like the beginning of any kind of like social relationship in the LA with a part of the LA art world that interested me at that time and still. So yeah, but it's not like a gallery that I'm in touch with regularly. Whenever I see Francois out, I say hi. We chit chat sometimes, but like, I'm not like, we're not like good friends or anything. But yeah, and then I've reached out to them for favors, with Bar Fund. I mean, if you want to call that a favor, but
I thought one of your favorites was like that you used to do a paid gig bartending. Like before Bar Fund.
Oh, yeah. So before Bar Fund, the way that Bar Fund started was that they were opening the space that they're in now. They had an opening for Joel Kayak. It was their first. Oh. They kind of had some like before they opened, they had Neil Balufa do this like huge installation before they built any walls in there or anything. It was really cool. But after Neil Balufa, their first like official opening was with Joel Kayak, and I was in between jobs. So I had worked for Andrea, then I went to Cal Arts, then I worked at 356 Mission like before they opened. So I like helped them prepare for opening, and then was there for their first year. And then in between working for 356 Mission and not having I didn't have a job for a period of time, and I like needed to fucking pay my bills and didn't know how I was going to pay my rent, and my rent was due like Monday, and it was like Thursday, And I saw Francois had this opening with Joel Kayak, and I was like, can I bartend? And they're like, yeah, sure, come bartend. And like, I ended up like bartending the opening and then the after party, and I made $600 that night, which we never made $600 throughout all of Bar Fund. We did a lot of openings, and I made exactly $600 in cash, to the dollar. And then I had the money to pay my rent, and that was like fucking amazing. And so that was how the idea for Bar Fund came, was from that. It was like, if it's this easy to make this amount of money, like
makes sense, yeah.
When I have a job, like this would be cool to like give back,
Was that a fluke? How in the world did that work?
It was destiny.
Because I feel like you would have started Bar Fund the way that it did if you only made like $150 that night. You know what I mean? Like if you took the average of what people made during Bar Fund, would you have started Bar Fund? Because part of me is like amazed that there was so. Because it's not like you were delusional, but like, yeah, I would definitely say that's like an actual worthwhile endeavor if you made $600 in a night.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
guess it's
always end
just
up on video calls. I'm so sorry.
no. It's just funny to me when I think about like, would you have done Bar Fund the way you would have done it if you thought that the $600 was a fluke? But it sounds like the $600 was like really early on, and you just didn't question it. You're like, "Yep, this is totally legit."
Well, it was like a bumping opening. You know, when you go to an opening and you're like, damn, this is the place to be. It was like the place to be. And I could tell that, you know. And I did bartend after that a bunch for it was called Fahrenheit, but before it was called Fahrenheit, it was called
behind them.
Flack. But it was before they moved there, I think. I don't know. I had bartended for like a few. It might have actually mostly been Francois and like others in that complex. I cannot remember, but it was when I was struggling with anxiety. It was something I wasn't sure I would be able to do because I had a really hard time being out and being around people. But yeah, I did it like when I wasn't working because I had like all those like so much anxiety and panic attacks and stuff. I was really struggling with that. And so bartend and like I just had this idea in the back of my head. And sometimes I would not make much money at all, you know, and that was when I was like, okay, we need to have like a minimum that we tell people, like, you know, can't like be here bartending for 4 hours and only make $20. Like that's not cool. So I did know going into it that there's I don't know. I think the 600 is the thing that gave it gave me the idea. But yeah.
It's just fun. I always like finding out that things almost sound like more, what's the word for it? It's like underdog stories. It's like, actually, this could have totally not panned out. There's a lot of serendipity and trust that did make it happen. But also, like, that's smart. I wonder, at what point did you know that you'd have to do stuff like make a minimum? Because I wouldn't have ever thought of that. But you seem very, like, matter-of-factly about it, like as if there was a model somewhere else.
No, I had to figure it out. It happened a few times. It happened because there were a few times where we did not have a minimum for a long time.
Oh.
But it's like people don't realize, like I tried to make a model that was for that project that was really simple, you know, like the space would have to buy all of the booze that they wanted to serve. They would have to buy the ice. They'd have to provide everything. They'd have to pull everything out to the area that they wanted it to be served from, you know, have the table set up and everything. And like, so that the artist that was bartending could just show up and serve. And they could like show up and like, you know, rearrange stuff and like maybe help like put some stuff on ice, but all the supplies had to be there. And like, didn't want like artists showing up and having to like carry shit out and like, you know, so it was like just the bartending. But for some reason, and so then the process would be like, I'd see an opening happening that I thought would be have like a certain, you know, like attendance or response from the public where there would be, you know, because you can go to openings and they're great openings, you know, but there's like, you know, not that many people there, you know, at a time. Maybe it's a smaller gallery or, you know, whatever. And so we had to kind of be like more select about where we were bartending. And so the process was I would look at the openings for the week. I would see like, I would assess like what I thought would be a bigger opening. I'd reach out to the space. They'd say yes or no. If they said yes, then I'd send an email to a group of artists who said they wanted to be a part of the project and see if anyone was available. And then
so you wouldn't even think that they were going to have a bartender. Like you'd plot the idea that like, hey, this is a project that's looking for galleries and openings that would have a bartender.
Yeah, and then after a while, it was like spaces would just reach out and be like, hey, we're having an opening this weekend and we need a bartender, and so, and that was good because then I wouldn't have to be like so vigilant, but it also wasn't good because not every opening is going to be big, but like you want to maintain, I wanted to like maintain a relationship with the
Which is why
space.
you want to have a minimum. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was, so anyway, I wanted to make this model that was really simple, and it sounds really simple. Like you find the space, you know, that's going to have the opening. You ask them, they say yes. You ask the bartenders, they show up. But there's like actually in that small amount of like time that the process like falls apart like in so many ways. Like there's
Oh,
just
wow.
so many like things that can happen, you know, like either the gallery thinks that the project works differently and has more expectations of what we're actually doing. Um, in some cases, you know, like one of the artists might forget. That's happened. That's really frustrating. They forget that they're supposed to go, and like the gallery's like, where's the bartender? And I'm like, huh, okay, like I don't know, you know, and like so like kind of putting out fires and trying to maintain relationships and um you know, because sometimes it's like for a VIP event, or that actually did happen at a VIP event where one of the bartenders just forgot and like didn't show up. And then like sometimes, you know, like I would always some some of some of the gigs were volunteer, and then some of them were paid. And
Oh,
that I wanted them to all be paid, but in actuality, spaces don't always want to include in their budget, you know, to pay a bartender for an event. Either they don't want to or they can't, you know.
mm.
Um, and that's actually very common. And you know, if people didn't want to volunteer, like if artists didn't want to volunteer, then where am I going with this? Oh, then they can then these spaces, like if I demanded there to be a wage, you know, that was paid for the bartender to the bartender, then like a lot of spaces would probably just be like, all right, well, we're just gonna find someone else that wants to do it for the tip money, you know. And so that was like, you know, anytime I sent out an email to the artists that were interested in being bartenders, it would be like, this is the location, this is the time, this is what the exhibition is, like if it's paid or not, if it's paid, how much it's paid, you know, how many hours, if there's any additional expectations, you know. We had like a decent number of paid ones, but we had like probably more volunteer ones. And what's interesting is like the response from the artists was very varied. There were some people that like only wanted to do the paid ones. And there were some people who really preferred the volunteer ones because the volunteer ones felt more fun, like less like a job, you know, where they're being like
Sure.
overseen by whoever's hosting, and more like they're showing up and they're part of the scene, and like they're the bartender, and it's like, you know, bartender is kind of like a fun position to be at like to play like in a party or in like a, you know, in an opening. I always enjoy doing it.
Yeah, like there is a
Um,
social capital to it in terms of being able to like get to know people in a very low key way without having to like be threatening if you're like, hey, who are you? This is who I am to a ton of
It's
people.
so, yeah. Like sometimes I can be very socially awkward at openings, but when I'm the fucking bartender, it gives me a purpose. You know, it's like I have a role that I'm playing, and like I just get so into it. Like I can, I don't know. I actually really, really, really enjoy bartending. I kind of miss it now that we're talking about it. And it's been
What
so
is it
long.
about what's that culture of bartending? Is it just because like people are hanging out and being like a person that's just with their thoughts and you're like are there to interject and be like, how are you?
It's a little bit of that, and like I said, I can be like socially awkward sometimes, so it's like it gives me a purpose, which immediately takes that away. And it's also, I mean, I am, when I'm not being socially awkward, a very social person, and genuinely enjoy, like I am an extrovert. I thrive off of like conversations and meeting people, and so like standing in one place at an opening and having people come to me. It's like I always equated it to like speed dating. You know, you have like a quick
Right.
like 1 minute conversation with like each person as you're like pouring the booze, and it can be like depending on how busy the opening is. For like I really like the busy openings because then you're just like one person after the other, and you're kind of like getting into this energy, and it's almost like in a way it's like being a DJ to the party. Like you're kind of responsible for like like, this thing that like, the booze that sort of feeds like an energy into the party, uh, um, or into the opening, which openings can be very party like sometimes, some of them. So yeah, I like the social aspect of it. I like checking out people's clothes, and like, it's a lot of like small talk, which I think some people hate, but like I actually kind of like it sometimes. It's like when someone walks up and they have like a really cool shirt on, you're like, oh, that shirt, blah 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 blah, and you talk about the shirt for a second and pour them their drink, and then they go away, and then the next person comes and you're like, your hair, it's like, where did you get it done? Oh, you live in Hollywood. Like, how long like, I don't know. It's just like a little stupid these little stupid like conversations that last a minute, and then you're on to the next stranger, you know.
Cool. Yeah. I
Just
forget.
like little mini stories that you get.
I don't think I've ever thought about it, but I don't really know if I like or dislike small talk because I can't figure out if I just automatically launch into super deep conversations and then I'm just like, oh, you've been here for like 20 minutes. Sorry, that should have been like a minute. Um, but I'm trying to think.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think I would say that I like small talk otherwise. Like, the other time that I experience small talk regularly is like through dating apps, and like that's it's kind of, there's like this cookie cutter kind of like, what do you do? Like, kind of, like with bartending, it's a different kind of small talk. It's like it's more fun.
Yeah, no, I like the idea that you equate it with being like the DJ that helps set the tone for a party. Totally makes sense to me. Because then you are
Yeah.
kind of there to be yourself and to be useful to serve. Because yeah, anyone can technically serve themselves drinks, but it's far more interesting if like you're a station of interest that people could bop around. Like you
Yeah.
could start, you could go talk to
Yeah.
the bartender, get a drink. The drink will be free. That's just fun
Yep.
in itself. It's like I'm going to have free liquor. Um, but yeah, I think there's like a funny thing when I was thinking about who the real bartenders were, and I always felt like I was a fake bartender. And I thought of myself as a fake bartender because I didn't know how to like what to focus on. I remember people who were good at it were actually so efficient at like cutting limes, knowing how you will arrange like ice and cutting and opening something so that you're not like
Yeah.
someone wait for a long time. Um,
Yeah, that's funny because I learned so much of those things like through the project. These like skills of like how to ice drinks, like what's the most efficient way to do that. And it's amazing how many people don't know that,
it does involve
actually.
like actually having water, doesn't it? And then adding ice to water. Because I always remember when I was giving free Coca-Cola drinks. Oh, vitamin water. It's all about like having not just ice, but like a lot of liquid.
Yeah, if you add water. But the other thing that I found a lot of galleries did, funny to be talking about this, like but another thing I found that galleries did, like when they were putting the drinks on ice themselves, they would put all the ice in the bucket and then they would put the drinks on top, or like try and shove it in the ice. And the best way to do is you like put the drinks in the bucket and then you put the ice on top and let it fall in between and underneath the drinks. There's
Yeah.
like a little more nuance to that, but I'm not like, I don't need to like get into the details of it, but like it's just that funny little like reversal of like, yeah, of ordering these things and
Man,
like
I
how you.
forgot that I used to do so much marketing jobs, and actually that is the same fucking thing as bartending. It was always small talk, and all I did was hand out free promo stuff to people. Those jobs were like
Oh,
weird because I couldn't
do you
tell.
like it?
Well, I don't know because I thought that I had a knack for not caring about where I was. Like, yeah, I'll be at a NASCAR event in Michigan and wear a TV that says Ice Road Truckers and hand out like bumper stickers. It sounded so stupid, but then it would pay like $30 an hour. So part of me is like, fuck, I'll do whatever you want for $30 an hour, which in Detroit was a lot more than it
That's
is in LA.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good income, and for something that sounds easy although tiring. Because marketing, that's small talk, but it's also like you have like kind of a script in a way. Like you have to talk about a certain
Clearly.
thing.
The only script is what you're. They don't tell you what you can't say, which would be bad because reverse psychology, I would be like, oh shit, I just said that water is like mostly sugar. But instead, they were like, all you have to do, like it was such a science before it got to you. So all you do as a marketer, say if you're giving out free samples of pork, or if you're handing out like a drink of some sort, all you're being told is that it's you have to convey to someone that no, it really is free, and that will be your biggest problem is that people will want to pass you by and not get this thing that's free, and you're just supposed to keep reminding them how free is. And that's like a really funny
That's
concept
funny.
because
That
otherwise
is.
you are hired because you're a pretty person that smiles. So I must have been smiley enough. But I also remember, like, the thing that reminds me of Bar Fund a little bit is that's not what makes up the job of being in marketing. Like, most of the time, you're trying to beat other people to applying for that job. So you had to be on your phone a lot, just waiting to send a headshot in. Um, like,
Oh, funny. You have to send a headshot in because it is
yeah.
literally pretty people or people that look friendly or something.
And then you have
Huh.
to be in the networks of someone who knows when jobs are like being worth within a network to be then asked to do that job. And it still took a full like year until I was like able to be like a manager and like pick people that then would walk around with me and hand out stuff. But it was always stuff that people would want anyway, so that's easy. I would be super curious to know what you think of the fact that when, well, actually, there's two things. The first thing I guess I'll ask is, you said you held on to like 2 grand of money from bartending. I can't remember why you said you did that. Like in my head, it's like, is that just money that you wanted to turn into an art project already, and you saved that money up? Like I couldn't remember the logic behind that.
Like when I started it, you're talking about?
Yeah, because you said you're like, I've got this like uh,
Yeah.
bunch of money, and you were broke still in my head. So I was like, wait,
Yeah. Yeah. I was broke throughout the Bar Fund project. Um, yeah, I had been figuring out the project um, and how I would do it. And so I was bartending, like I said, when I had my anxiety and panic disorder. And I would just, anytime I made money from it, I would just stash it away and be like, this is for Bar Fund. Like, this is going into the Bar Fund bank. And so I funneled it away. And it took me a while to figure out the project. I also was like figuring out my relationship with Nick, like him and I, that project didn't happen until him and I separated. And then
oh,
Haley, yeah, Haley from LACA, like I had told her the idea and she was just always on me about it. Like, you gotta do this, and finally she was like, look, let's like do a studio, like let's like meet up and like figure this project out, like how you can do it. And so we sat down and we're just like, okay, this is like what I'm planning on doing. I guess like I just didn't know how to like get the ball rolling. Like I already knew how I wanted to do it, but I was like, I don't know. We ended up like doing I ended up hosting a LACA ended up hosting a community meeting about. Did you go to that?
I did, but
About
I think that was the time when you already told everyone you had 2 grand. Like I'm still trying to get to that point of like,
yeah, yeah. I had already had that money, and it was sort of like my feeling in general when you start projects like this, like that are community based and that require like cooperation and an end goal, and like I didn't have any kind of track record, of doing anything like it. I wasn't like an artist that had done a project that was known really here in LA. So it's like, who the fuck am I? Like, and so it kind of felt like bait in a way. It was like, it was like not bait, but like, this is already happening, So it felt like people might take it more seriously, So it's like, we already have this amount of money. We're trying to get to this amount of money. Like, who's in, So it wasn't starting from zero, which it probably could have started from zero. I don't know. The people, then I sent out, LACA sent out an email. I sent out an email. I had this like meeting. A bunch of people showed up. It was a really great turnout. And people that like I really respected, too, were there, which I was surprised about. And then it was like, okay, I guess I got to like do this thing now, And so then I just sent out like a personal email being like, all right, this is this idea, like who wants to be a part of it? And that was just all my personal email list. And then I think like other people like also like sent it out. I don't know. Like,
so from what I know of like when I first met you, there's this timeline in which you and Dan Bustillo have the residency at the Reef. At some point, Donald Trump becomes president and you get so mad about it that you offer free massages as like a way of talking about a new economy. And I like took you up on that, but wanted to barter to like make your studio like soundproof for massages.
Did I ever give you a massage?
You did. I think you touched my lower back. I was just like, this is real.
Okay.
But what I couldn't remember is like, at which point did you start collecting $2,000 and putting it away between like you and Dan being in that thing? Because
first of all, Dan wasn't in that residency with me.
Oh.
Dan was in the residency. They were in the group before me. I know Dan from a whole other thing that I should tell you about sometime if you don't know about it already. Which is
isn't that the
Never Hit
Send?
Never Hit Send. Yeah. Yeah. So I know Dan actually from CalArts originally. Like me and them would like run into each other in the hall, and we'd always just start talking about shit that we were like both interested in, and we just, I don't know. I think Dan's like an Aquarius or something, maybe. Like, I don't know. I always like really enjoyed talking to them. Like I felt like we were always like on a similar level with stuff. And then we were in Never Hit Send together, and then they were in the CalArts residency. They were like the first round of that residency, which I think was only 6 months, and they were, I think, maybe one of two artists that advocated for turning one of the women's restrooms at the Reef into a gender neutral restroom, which they did. And then when I came into residence there, I wanted to do an exhibition in that space, using that space to think about the body and all of the iterations and dimensions and like all of the there's just so much, like there's like, like the biological, but also like the political and the economic and like all these different aspects of the body. So I wanted to have an exhibition that invited artists that addressed the body. It was very open, but that addressed the body in some sort of expanded way. And Dan was one of the artists in that exhibition, and who I also spoke to like when I was putting it together to just, I don't know, to see what they thought.
I remember photographing a ton of stuff that I found out it was like your laptop, and I was like, oh, there's like two people blowing into like a balloon. Oh, there's like all these interesting, but I couldn't figure out how many projects did you end up doing, because they weren't all at the same time.
No, I considered it one exhibition, and it's funny because people are like, oh, so you're a curator, and I'm like, no, I consider it like I always think like an artist, and I don't know what title to give any of these things, but I don't consider myself a curator, and I don't consider that to be like, like obviously it's not a traditional kind of exhibition, but I considered it one exhibition that unfolded over time with one work viewable at a time, and that was like sort of meant to be in conversation with, things that I was, I organized that after having all of this panic and anxiety that I had a really hard time coping with, and had to learn a lot about my own body and the body in general because of that. And so, so this was one exhibition that unfolded over a 4-month period of time that I think had like, God, I don't remember how many artists. It was Dan, It was Barbara T. Smith. It was Julia Kuneski. It was Jules Gimbroni. It was Paul Sapuya and Lygia Clark and Elise M. Durer. 7 people. It was seven artists.
So interesting. Because now I'm remembering one of the things I wanted to like bring stuff back to for Bar Fund was one, it's an art project, which was going to be my second question was like, how do you feel about the fact that like one of your big debut art projects was so admin heavy? And like, do you feel like you're almost regretting the fact that like you fell into it, or do you feel like it makes sense? Like you're like, oh, of course, going from the body to admin, that makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm very comfortable with admin. It's like, as a Gemini, it can be very, not to lean on astrology, just Gemini or not, I can be a very scatterbrained person. And admin stuff kind of makes me or makes one, have to create like a container for organizing, for working through something, for seeing something through, And I think that's actually really helpful for me. And it's something I kind of thrive on sometimes because I know how to do it and that feels good. And also coming from, as I said, I had done body work for 9 years in Miami before coming to LA. And when I came to LA, then wanted to work in the art world. And the easiest way for me to do that without having many, definitely not competitive, like technical skills where I would work in an artist studio, was to do administrative work within the art world. And yeah, I mean, it can be really, I'm almost just so used to it, that it's okay. But I do miss working more tactilely and more spontaneously and like with materially. But I almost like I feel intimidated by that now, which is funny because that's my art practice began like that way. It began, with using materials and stuff, and the pleasure of that. But yeah, and now the census is like also very administrative. And I mean, the things I like about the thing that I probably like the most about those projects, it's not like I enjoy the admin because I don't, but I really enjoy like the social aspects. Like the census, I'll get like really bogged down with admin stuff, and I'm like, oh, I need to just like talk to people, and that's like the best part. It's like, having like a reason to talk to you, a data scientist, doing some like interesting shit. It's like, oh, cool. Like I get to like engage in these conversations. Yeah,
it's like whatever that word is for like arrangement. It's like an arranged way to talk with people. It seems actually really social again, like the way you were just describing small talk and bartending.
Bartending, yeah. Those are my favorite parts. Is that I really enjoy the social stuff of it.
Which makes sense.
But the admin part,
you have a what's the word for it? You have a broader view of your projects, like because you can see the macro view. You get to see how you'll have the micro enjoyments of like social interaction. So even if there's like things that might be a drag, I think there's something interesting to me about how understanding you are about the importance of admin being done well, because like you didn't want that to just come back to you or anyone else. Like you are just literally describing organization and like the necessity of it, not necessarily like its pleasure or the things that suck about it. You're just saying like, well, this is necessary, and you don't get to do it without doing the organizing. Which is essentially like also technically social, because what you're doing is you're clarifying expectations with people. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's another thing is you don't really get to have relationships with people without constantly like reiterating expectations and knowing what people get out of things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is neat. I was trying to figure out like how do I bring this all together in terms of like what's the body of Bar Fund, or what is the way that something, because I still feel like there's something about it that in some ways you could say that Bar Fund is maybe similar to other art projects that people do that are not the same as being like social practice as much as they are uh, they're like ways that people will let you do a certain kind of work. Like to me, it reminds me of when I'm being subversive, or as you were saying, like deviant. I feel like there's almost something like how you were like, one, it's kind of weird the way that we have to make money. Like, how are you ever going to make more money than just being struggling? But also, you still want to like celebrate life and people and the things that we can do. So it's like you wouldn't want to just be bartending for the sake of bartending. You wouldn't want to just be making money for the sake of making money. Like you're kind of talking about the extra stuff of life that you want to support. Like it's not just about um, your own personal gain, your own personal network. Like there's something at stake
Right.
that sounds like, well, there's literally no point to money if one, you could lose it at any point, and you freaked out this much. Like there's something interesting too about like how much of it's not necessarily driven by anxiety, but it's like there's a term for you're doing it despite the anxiety. And I feel like the cool thing about the word despite is like you're doing it to spite anxiety. It's like if you were to say you were against anxiety and prove anxiety wrong, you're going to do the most social thing that actually is the opposite of like this feeling that's telling you something that's not real, which is like the world is ending, you're worth nothing. Like
Right.
it's like trying to confront a liar, but the liar just happens to be you. It's not entirely society.
Right.
It's like a part of you.
Are you talking literally about my like pathological anxiety that I was experiencing
In some ways,
personally, or are you talking more generally?
I guess both, because when I'm trying to figure out what does someone need to do bar fund, like do I say, well, first start off with a lot of anxiety, and then it's like there's a way that bar fund I think sits within a lot of projects that people do that aren't social practice, and I think have more to do with just trying to get away with pushing the extra qualities in life that are great, even if it's like there's no blueprint or roadmap for it. I think that's part of the excitement is like you can almost own an art project by the fact that you don't know how to do it. So however way that you figure out how to do it, that's like your signature. So you don't even have to like come across and be like, oh, well, I do things in this way because I'm a Gemini or something. Like instead, it's like I will know myself better by throwing myself into something that won't kill me, but you know that it also might be interesting. Like there's an experimental aspect to it that is the point, I think. Um, but I also wonder about is it, because a lot of art is actually art therapy. And I think I'm just realizing, even as an art educator, I just need to accept that that might be its main role, less about expression in terms of like within society and getting feedback and being cohesive with the world. I think in some ways, art making is like this absurd thing that we use to create meaning in our lives that literally just our lives won't have meaning unless we do that art. So I don't think you can extricate and be like, oh, well, there's art that is like for money or art that's for making yourself feel healthy. And then there's like the real art. Like I just feel like if you do art, very likely something's not great in your life. Very, very likely. And you're using art as a vehicle to like not just put your energy into something to avoid things, which is possible. But I think
Yeah.
like art is still a vehicle to get out of a bad place. And like now I can kind of see Bar Fund not just as you trying to get out of some place. Like it's not like a pity party. It's like a possibility thing. It's like if you're saying if Bar Fund works, even if we try, the trying itself is like a huge success. Like if someone shows up to bartend, if the galleries themselves bring the understand the relationship, which is that they bring ice, they do all the shit they're supposed to, and then they actually are like allowing some artists to walk away with money that, like, even if they're getting a bartender to work for free, I still think that there's like a risk that a art space knows that they have to take, which is like they have to pay for the booze. If no one shows up, they just wasted a lot of money. Um,
Yeah.
it's shitty that they don't pay bartenders, but I still feel like, oh man, I wish I could read more into this. Someone told me to look up Pierre Bourdieu and how like the concept of art and social capital.
Mm.
Um, there's like this aspect that art doesn't technically exist. Like it exists in a socio-economic sense that a bunch of rich people, gallerists, and that would even include the bartenders, create the culture that is the art world. So there's like a literal socio-economic creation that is not neutral. So I need to look into that again. But
What is
essentially,
the name? It's Pierre Bourdieu.
Bourdieu. Someone told me to read this guy's theory because I wasn't very good at reading theory, and no one ever told me like where to look. And literally just yesterday, I refound Pierre Bourdieu talking about art, and he talks about art as like you could almost say he's saying art is for rich people. And the reason he says it is because if you were to look at what in our modern day, how we create, how art functions, there's so many players that you could claim that it's trying to hold itself up as like a thing, and it doesn't actually just exist, but it's created, especially from the West, as a Western ideals and Western culture. So it would kind of fly in the face of calling like African art, because in African culture, it might be material culture, it might be spiritually important, but it might actually be extremely bastardized in the realm of being put into a museum, then being looked at, and it's not even functional. Uh,
Totally. Yeah.
I think we as artists are in a way still fighting even the idea of like art just for rich people. So if you create Bar Fund, you are technically still thinking about funneling the social capital away from the people that buttress art. And like, yeah, there's artists that create the opportunities for art, but like you're also reiterating it by being like, if the bartenders are also artists, you can't not think about how many artists are also art workers. Like artists are moonlighting as people to support the gigantic machine that is art and the art world, just to maybe have the possibility of also being involved in art. And so your subversive thing is like you also technically introduced another art piece into someone else's art show, and also into people's consideration of like what are they supporting as an art world. So if someone takes a drink, I think Bar Fund partially exists in that world of guilting someone into giving a tip, because it's like talking about what do people get from art that they don't pay for. So if Bar Fund actually
Mm.
makes more regular the exchange, even if it is through a thing like guilt, like, hey, look, I'm an artist who's literally in front of you. I might not be showing my work right now, but as a concept, we're everywhere. We designed your clothes. We made your, it's like a Fight Club kind of thing. But yeah, I feel like your subversiveness and your anger is the only thing that I think people were able to see of how it's art is through the activism of your anger. Like you always said it in terms of this is how many more millions a museum is getting, which is
Yeah.
true. Like boards, for some reason, are made up of extremely wealthy people that do, in fact, make so much money that not only can they blow money on art, but their foundations never can lose money. They literally invest and make their money back even when they spend it. So there's two worlds that art functions in. And one world uh, siphons off the energy of all these artists, and another world
Yeah.
makes art because it feels like it's trying to survive, which is like the part where I'm describing art as a function of art therapy. But it's weird, right? Because if you do art for yourself and someone figures out how to sell it, even though I don't think that really ruins your art therapy that you get from making the art, I think maybe when people look at it from the outside, they think that what you get out of it is like the money. But when there was a time where it's like, all right, now we want to be paid for what we put into the world, for making the world a more interesting place, as Wage puts it, I think no one wants to pay for art the moment that you say the rules of the game. So if the rules of the game are dictated by an artist, I think most people are like, no, an artist is not someone who I trust. A rich person is someone I trust because they have money and therefore they must have done something right. And part of me wonders if you even insert artists into the role of workers is both strategic in that people are then reminded of how hard artists work, reminded that artists do a job on top of doing another job, and you trick people into giving artists money when they secretly they secretly don't want to give artists money because they don't think that they should have to pay for art. Um, but yeah, so I'm realizing if you were to tell someone, oh, you can do Bar Fund, I think what's kind of interesting is like the nuts and bolts of it are entirely admin. If you were to do Bar Fund, you have to have two types of social capital. You, one, have to have the gumption of ethics to know that people can trust you to hold on to the money. But two,
Yeah.
you actually had to have the ground game to know what galleries might be worth doing an event at because they're that successful. So it's like you're using your brain that if you're a rich person would just be used for being like, oh, I want to be where Paris Hilton is, or I want to be where the people are, just to be seen. But you're flipping that into a very not money oriented, but you're flipping it into an opportunity oriented lens where you still aren't the sole benefactor. You were very uncomfortable with being someone who just made $2,000 from bartending at an artist's space. I think instead you traded thinking about your role as an artist and an art worker and your body and the toll. And I think you spiritually were strong enough to flip it and be like, I'll be fine if I hold on to this $2,000 and I don't know what to do with it. Which, yeah, maybe someone doesn't have to start with $2,000, but that's a huge sign that you're trustworthy, that you didn't spend the $2,000. Like, I think like even today, if you have $2,000 and people are like, well, did you donate any of it to Black Lives Matter? Did you help pay for like maybe your mom's medical expenses, your brother's medical expenses? Like that money becomes this concept that you have to use it for something that's a cause. So it's interesting that you turn Bar Fund into its own self-fulfilling system where the artists that get involved then get to also be benefactors of people who try to make the art world that they exist within better. So essentially, you did create a co-op. A co-op is supposed to be a place where the things you would normally buy into, you are also an owner of the thing that you're trying to buy. So if artists are trying to buy into the social capital, which they could turn into real capital, Bar Fund says not only will you get the experience of being on a jury to see what other people are making, but you will also be in control instead of the powers that be, which don't work. You'll be able to be in control of how the money is spent and how you invest in yourself. And the essential investment is in the trust of each other in the art community. So that's what makes it an interesting, not quite a product, but it's actually a socialist co-op model.
Are you reading this right now? Did you write this and you're reading it? Or
no,
you're just like off thinking it?
off the top
No,
of my head.
I like how you're articulating it. I'm glad it's being recorded.
Yeah, no, but the whole thing that I've always tried to talk with you about is like, okay, there's two big issues for me that I want to do when I want to like write about this. One is that it has to be understood as Tatiana's art piece, which has like lots of parts to it. Like to define something as an art piece, you're kind of like needing to describe the intent, the audience, its bounds. Like, does Bar Fund still exist or not? Because you've had 2 years of it. I would claim that it exists as long as anybody's interested in it. And so the fact that I'm interested in it means that like Bar Fund has always had a way that anyone can insert themselves into it. So that's interesting. Like you aren't so ownership based that you will sue someone who tried to do their own Bar Fund, for example. But you could have made money if you were like, I'm going to get, oh my God, I'm going to get venture capitalist money and I'm going to, get the copyright to the word Bar Fund. You technically have not followed in the steps of other business entrepreneurs in LA because that's the first thing.
Yeah. But I'm not really like, I don't know. I don't necessarily I don't really care about any of that stuff.
I see. This is where I think it's weird. I think you do, and that so the reason why I think that you do and that we should is that you just are working off of a different business model. If capitalism's business model is extract from whatever you have access to, it's infinite, and therefore you will reap the rewards of whatever clever idea or investment you put in. You basically said the capitalist model is part of the reason why you feel drained, maybe even part of the reason why you feel anxiety. Like there's a lot of anticipation to
Yeah.
use things correctly and to extract. Like you're never actually giving back in capitalism. Like that's the thing that's I think is freaks a lot of us out. It's like how can something be spiritually good if it literally doesn't replenish anything? But in like indigenous cultures, everything's about being a steward of this thing that you're given. So I still think that like co-op socialism and indigenous people all have the same kind of core idea of sustainability, and not sustainability, which means like keep the status quo, which I just learned is like another definition of sustainability. But like indigenous people literally would take care of the same places that they would hunt and gather berries or whatever, because there is like what we would call respecting the land. I think they would consider like how you survive generations. Like you don't get to survive generations just by caring about if your grandchildren exist. I think you care if your great 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 grandchildren exist. So you kind of have to replant a tree, or you'd have to not kill all the mammoths. And I think even without full-on historians, I think indigenous people would go, "Oh my God, remember that time that we used to hunt mammoths and then they stopped existing?" I think there's like a collective consciousness that understands, like, you might enjoy the party for right now, but you're really not going to enjoy the party if, for example, you're surrounded by your trash, or if you make a lot of enemies.
Right.
Like, it's not going to be a great life. So as much as people poo-poo on like socialism, to me I'm just like you're still hustling. You're doing the exact same hustle as a capitalist, but the difference is you differ from a capitalist in what you think the end goal will be that's the most productive. And that's just a difference of opinion. So if you said if the money's better off if I don't just keep it, which people in the group when we first were talking, there were so many people that said just invest in your own company. Like there was a lot of people who wanted you to just make the money grow, and then supposedly you could help more people. But
Yeah.
that is ignoring the human side of the project, which is what do you get out of it and what do you learn? Like you were even just describing things you learned while bartending. And I would claim that you
Yeah.
subconsciously knew there's stuff to learn when you do expansive work. Like there's nothing about Bar Fund that wasn't expansive, except for the
Yeah.
part where I think you got tripped up on like how do you help other people make their own bar fund. That's the only part where I think that you were like, oh, that's even more work. And so like that to me makes sense that you'd be like, let's not talk about that, because all the admin that you're trying to cover, all of the like self-respect, like also no project is fun if you can't reflect on it in the moment and be like, where am I? Am I a monster? Was this all a bad idea? You also took the pace. In my head, you were living week to week, maybe not day to day, but like you just said that you'd look up, and this is the other thing that someone has to have social capital, knowing what the good art shows were. I don't even think you
Yeah.
were comfortable with just having all of that information. Like you even technically, without any of us being aware of it, if you were telling someone, oh, you want to get a leg up in the world, visit every gallery that someone did a bartending event at. You could have used that as like a how to introduce yourself to the LA art scene, and you didn't get into, say, what's the name of that thing you're in? Mountain School.
Yeah.
Like, you did create more than just a micro grant. Like, the things that
Yeah.
were
There's
product.
all kinds of stuff to mine out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people could have mined the shit out of that. And I think you even knew that you needed to be self-protective of something, but you didn't quite know what you needed to protect. I think you always do know that you needed to protect the privacy of the people that were submitting stuff to Bar Fund. And I think you've always known to like not burn out bartenders, which is why you worked so hard at like all they do is show up. And even if they don't
Yeah.
show up, you don't shame them. Like I thought it was
Yeah.
interesting that like you took on so much of the heat, either if that's from the ICA or anybody who didn't like have clear communication. Like you didn't even have artists prove that they are who they are. Like you were the person that would take the heat if someone was a serial killer. You would be the person who would take the heat if like a bartender felt threatened by someone who just showed up at that opening. Like you were the liability for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. I
But
know.
but
This
also
is partially why I feel like it's not actually a transferable project, because there's a lot of things that happened within the project that was like, whew, this is a big responsibility, and I would never. There's liability stuff. There's also which we haven't even talked about yet. Ultimately, what killed the project is I spent the first year talking to a lot of different people in a lot of different to a few different people in different types of positions that might understand the aspects of distributing alcohol and the liability
that's true.
associated
Yeah,
with that.
yeah.
So the other like the thing that killed Bar Fund, really, really the thing that killed Bar Fund is that legally we always had to operate under the radar. And I spoke with a lawyer, an arts lawyer. I spoke with someone in catering, the Full Moon Pickles person who's a CalArts MFA graduate who started a catering company. I talked to her about it. I talked to a few people about it to try and figure out like how we might, go about doing it in a legal way, and in a way. So there's like two legal aspects. There's a few legal aspects. One is like the distribution of alcohol at galleries is actually illegal technically, and galleries, like the consequence for galleries is either a $5,000 fine or jail time. And there's been two incidences that I've heard of. One was in Laguna Beach, where a bunch of galleries were fined $5,000 because someone was complaining about the noise, and like, it was like a way for some, I don't know. I think it was, I don't know. There's a lot of parts to this, but and then I've heard but never like found online any details about like Culver City had like something happen with galleries there and their openings and alcohol distribution that caused galleries to like not like have alcohol at their openings for a period of time, maybe even still. So there's that. There's like actually the distribution of alcohol without a license is illegal. There's the liability part. If any of our bartenders are serving booze and someone's getting drunk, it definitely happens. It's happened to me a few times, where you have to like cut someone off. You have to know when to like, and at the beginning I didn't know. I didn't even think about it. I was like, man, this guy's like really going for it, and like, I would cut someone off eventually, but I remember there was this older guy. I think he was just an alcoholic, and like he probably had like a really high tolerance, and he like came back for booze like so often, but he seemed fine. Like he didn't seem like he was getting drunk. But later I took this like free like what was it? I just got an email actually like last week saying your certificate's about to expire. I was like, fuck you. But it was like some like alcohol distribution, like maybe it was like a bartender course, and it like trained it. I learned a lot from it actually, and it was good. Like going into Bar Fund to have taken that. It's just like an online thing that teaches you like if someone is coming back over and over again and they seem to have a high tolerance, you still have to cut them off after a certain number of drinks because XYZ. I can't even remember, it still impairs their judgment. And if they get into a car and drive and kill someone, injure someone, kill themselves, injure themselves through driving under the influence, the cops do an investigation and they find out, like, they try and trace back, like, where they were drinking booze, and that person is partially held responsible, you know? So, I mean, that's like, those are heavy responsibilities, you know? I mean, that's like life and death kind of shit. And then there's also the legal stuff. And then it was like, okay, well, we could become a nonprofit, and nonprofits get like an opportunity. I think it's like 12 times a year in the state of California, they can apply for a beer and wine license for $25 an event, you know, so once a month. Yeah, once a month they can get a temporary beer and wine license for an event, and that's like, it's cheap, you know. And so I was like, okay, what if we become a nonprofit? The expense of becoming a nonprofit for this, and like, it would be like, I would have to create another model, and that's okay, but like,
another model, yeah.
it just seemed like more work, and it seemed like starting over when this was meant to be like something that was like really DIY, like, you know, that's part of like one of the main I think aspects of the project is just like we're doing it ourselves, you know. And
yeah, I'm actually curious, like, how do you feel about the fact that both Bar Fund and Never Hit Send, I think, are by design under the radar?
Yeah.
Because I think for a reason.
I mean, Never Hit Send was like, we were like performative. We were like performing. Never Hit Send was very performative, I would say. I don't think we were necessarily trying to be under the radar, you know. Like we did show stuff, you know, quite publicly, you know.
Did Never Hit Send do something at 365 Mission?
We did. We had a group show there.
I was always trying to like get my head around this, because when Joey was like, yeah, I was there when 365 Mission started, part of me was like, didn't you also help them close? So I was like confused about how Joey's relationship worked with knowing the
Oh,
crew.
he was like one of the protesters, you mean?
No. Oh, you never saw the message from Joey? He actually got an email from, I can't remember the guy's name, curator 365 Mission, and it
Ethan
he flat out asked Joey, what do you think we should do? And Joey laid a really long description of like how he could get out. And then I guess if the guy's name's Ethan also followed up by saying like, thanks Joey, like I figured it out, this is what we're gonna do, we're gonna close. And so like it wasn't the protesters that helped close it down. He actually asked someone who he trusted, and Joey gave him a really good breakdown of how to get out and how to close it down.
I think what happened is that they sent out a mass email to anyone that had exhibited or done a performance at the space. So I got that email too. And I think they were doing same thing. I'm sure a bunch of people said the same thing. It was a good run, but I mean, it was like, it just got really, I don't know, difficult, I guess. Complicated. I don't know. I don't even know what adjectives to use, but yeah. So that was like, I think that Ethan was reaching out to everyone that had exhibited there, and Joey had exhibited there through Never Hit Send.
Yeah, this is interesting because I actually got to hear from Jamila James describing when PSSST went down, and that was fascinating to hear so many different sides, where she was upset that Jules and the other main guy, I guess there was 3, but there's just 2 that were kind of left.
Barnett. It was Jules and Barnett were the ones who started it, and then I think Pilar was there with someone that they had hired.
Yeah.
I think.
And I remember
like
that what fascinated me was not so much that it was kind of the opposite of what happened with 365 Mission. Like I remember when Jules was doing really successful work getting money from West Hollywood, and then for projects. And then I remember being shocked that Jamila was like, if they had just contacted the board asking for help, we could have actually gotten a way to like really handle this without them having to close. But they didn't necessarily take everything as seriously as they could have at the beginning of when they started having problems. And Jamila was like, there's the same three women that are in every single news article protesting galleries in Boyle Heights. And she named them by name. And she was like, but by the time they were trying to have discussions about it, it was too late. So it makes sense why, I can't remember that Cal Arts professor, Charles Gaines, tried to have a conversation with people. And then there was like a refusal to go and meet and talk about it, which then people took as being in bad faith. But it was interesting that technically 365 Mission did what that gallery should have done, which was like contact everyone right away to discuss it.
365 did not contact everyone right away. They contacted people when I think first of all, 356 had a 5-year lease, lease that they had signed.
Yeah.
They were dealing with protesters heavy for like at least a year. Maybe, I don't know, at least 6 months, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half. I don't really know. I wasn't there for that part. So they signed a 5-year lease, and the end of their lease was coming up, and they were like, what do we do? Do we renew it? I think they probably already knew. I think like Laura was the one who was floating that project. I think she didn't want to deal with it anymore, understandably, and in large part because of probably mostly because of the protesters. And that's so I think, and hold on.
Yeah.
And then I don't know the whole story about PSSST, and I'm not good friends with Jules or Barnett, but I know both of them. And Jules, had some work in the exhibition that I did in the bathroom at the Reef. And so I was talking to them while this is going down. I think while it was going down. And they told me, I recall them telling me, this was years ago, but I recall them telling me that the person, and I remember when this first went around, when all of this first started, there was a petition that circulated that was by BAAD, BAAAHD or something. Do you remember this group? Like, I can't remember what it all stands for, but like Boyle Heights Artists Against the Arts District, BAAD, BHAA. So that it first started off just being a petition, that was like pretty nasty, I thought, but also, when it comes to gentrification and displacement of people, it's understandable, the stuff that comes out of that. What I remember Jules telling me was that the person that had organized this petition and this protest group was somebody that they had known personally, and that like had it out against them for something personal. And so
that too, like people kept saying it was a Cal Arts drama, which then I'm only like, but that only leaves like Kung or Nancy, who I didn't really know. Nancy ran like a pedagogy-based group.
It was neither of those people. It was somebody else. It was a student that I think Jules was in school with, and that had some some like personal problem. And Jules also added like had some mental health things that they felt like contributed to the animosity that they felt towards Jules. So it's interesting because, you know, we don't think about this. I don't typically think about this kind of stuff, that there are these like personal relationships and dramas that can like be catalysts for things that like, you know, I mean, this is like a social and political kind of movement that was happening for a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I
You
made
don't necessarily think about it as something that's coming from like a personal, drama per se.
Yeah. I was always trying to figure out why everyone was really into the story of like, oh, it's just CalArts drama. But like no one would really want to talk about the actual economy stuff, the economics of situations. Like they'd rather just pretend that it's like a reality TV show than the fact that artists don't get paid very much, the fact that artists don't actually get opportunities where they're running the show. Like that was the saddest thing to me about PSSST was that as I'm working at Cook's Crating, I know how much people aren't bashing Hauser and Wirth, and they're making tons of money through if it's Mark Bradford or a lot of white women artists, including this woman Nancy who wanted a show there, or like they just represent the canon. So that's like everyone from Baldessari to Jason Rhodes to I guess Isa Genskin, but what's his name, Mike Kelly or Chris Burden. Like it's just crazy to me that there was so much more vitriol towards something that was an experiment than Hauser and Wirth, which had nothing other than the fact that Schimmel left Hauser and Wirth. That was like the only drama they had was like another rich gay guy who's white left or something. Whereas PSSST, as even the board was super diverse, and the board of Hauser and Wirth is not super diverse. So
yeah, I'm sad about it too because they were trying to fill a void of creating like a queer space, you know, a space not just for queer artists.
Yeah. Oh no, it's breaking up again.